Good morning and welcome to this special board meeting of the Akron Public School Boards and the Joint Board of Review with our friends from the city. Mr. Thompson, roll call, please.
Mr. Alexander.
Present.
Ms. Autry.
Present.
Reverend Harrison.
Present.
Ms. Jackson.
Present.
Dr. Molnar.
Present.
5 present, 2 absent.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Now we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance led by.
Do we need to, I believe that you're considering it an APS meeting because of the number of board members, but do we need to just do a roll call for the Joint Board of Review as well?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate because it needs to be in the minutes. Thank you, Mayor.
Except I don't have those.
Yeah, we'll just, I guess we'll do a roll call, please, for the members from the city that are members of the Joint Board of Review.
Sure. Mayor Malik, present.
President Akron City Council Margot Somerville, present.
Steve Fricker, Finance Director for the City of Akron, present.
Euphron C. Lash, Director of Neighborhood Assistance, present.
Phil Lombardo, Budget Chairman.
Thank you. I think our secretary has that.
So we have an additional 6 members present, so that would make all of our JBR with a total of 5, well, actually 4 members from the school board, 6 from the city that announced that they were here.
I think it's 5 and 5, right?
Well, currently we have 4. The vice president and president are appointed to the board, attend committee meetings, and then we have 2 appointed members which are here.
Okay. We have 5 members from the city. So we have myself, President Somerville, Councilman Lombardo, Mr. Fricker, and Mr. Lash.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think the goal is to have 10 members, 5 and 5.
Based off of the information, we can look over that. The information we had a total of 4, 2 board members and 2 Heidi, and Dr. Robertson makes 5, the 5th person for the, but board members, there are 4 board members and then the school administrator. So to the mayor's point, for clarity, it's 5 and 5, including the superintendent.
Got it.
Okay. Next, we'll have the the Pledge of Allegiance. Mayor Malik, if you would, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we have the approval of our previous meeting minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. It's been moved by Mayor Malik. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by President Somerville. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none. We can move forward. I don't think that we have to call it to a vote for a committee meeting.
No, we don't.
All right. Next, on the agenda, we have the Citizen Monitoring Committee's reports.
Do we have an active citizen monitoring committee?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware of this committee and who is reporting out the collection, because this meeting, this collective hasn't come together in some time. So I guess now we're hashing this out in this meeting, but I'm not aware of President Mayor.
Sure. I think my understanding, and having spoken to Mr. Lash and others, that previously, per the contract, Citizen Monitoring Committee kind of reviewed expenditures from projects and then, was was really meant to dissolve after each segment. And so I think since there isn't an active segment under construction per the CLCs, that committee is not in existence. President Somerville, anything?
You said exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. I believe there was also, per the contract, kind of a CLC Access Advisory Committee that's also envisioned. I think that's also not actively working, but maybe something we can discuss later in the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Mallett. Member Harrison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mayor Malek's point, and I think as we go down this agenda, I want to make sure that not one entity dominates the meeting. Okay, I think I have talked with President Somerville, and I do think that this is a meeting where we can really get back to what we should have, what we shouldn't have, where we left off. And so as we look through the agenda, I think that my hope in having initial joint board of review, as I spoke with Member Autry when she was president, as I spoke with Member Autry before she was president about the joint board of review, I think this is an opportunity for us all to sit and loosely find out where we are and where we want to go. I think that would be a way to proceed here today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. To the mayor's point, which I think are relevant points, that when projects began, since the initial agreement were based around, it seems like as I perused through it, around CLCs, and the project has been complete, then it seems as though some of those committees that were designated for those purposes cease to currently have purpose. And so, as the mayor stated, as we gather here, to your point, is, okay, now moving forward, what are we doing? And the next agenda item is based on new business as far as, okay, what are we doing since we're collectively come together? Mayor Mallett.
Thank you. And based on Pastor Harrison's point, I think that, from my perspective, I'm sure we have some business to talk about today, but I guess my suggestion would be that we have several meetings, maybe over the next few months, so that maybe today can be kind of like a level set and get information and get ideas on the table, kind of make sure we're all kind of on the same page, and then if we have a couple successive meetings, that'll maybe allow us to come to some decisions, as appropriate. But I agree, we kind of need to make sure we're picking up where we left off.
Thank you.
Madam President.
Vice President Alexander.
Yes, I think what we have right now, we have an agenda that we have on tap right now. Let's go with our agenda today. And then what we may need to do after this is the Akron Public Schools leaders can get with city leaders and come up with draft agendas for the future, so we all know what we're having together. That'll be a little clearer for all of us at this time. So I think right now we go with our agenda, and then we can put together other agendas for the upcoming meetings. Thank you, Madam President.
No problem. Thank you, Vice President Alexander. And I'm in agreement as we're moving forward on the agenda. We're at the point of new business, and we have update on building projects. Now, one point of clarity as I was looking through the agreement is it had the start date of the agreement, but it also had the ending date of the agreement being December of 2033. Unless the parties came together to agree upon the dismantling, and my words, not the agreement's words, of the agreement. And so with that understanding, as we're moving forward to talk about the updating building projects, and I think you're absolutely right, Mayor, that we need more meetings so that we know the rules of engagement, like what are we meeting to talk about? What are we forecasting? What can we talk about? Because some of these things that's been mentioned in board meetings, which I think led to us here, everybody calling out this joint board of reviews, the city, and what are we really calling you all out to do and to meet with you about? So again, I do appreciate your time. But what we can do based off of the agreement, and what is the authority of the school district in lieu with the city with this agreement. I think those are, since we're about to go into current building projects, because as I understand, when I read through the agreement, a majority of those projects have been completed, to your earlier point. And so now, since we have this agreement that is fixed until 2033, I think as we move forward to talk about the building project, since this is like a skeleton agenda, like what does that conversation look like? Because as also, and please insight, because I'm new to the table, I wasn't here at the onset of all these things. But as I read it, it seems very clear that it's the agreement is based upon community learning centers construction. And when you talk about the committee oversight, as far as budgetary constraints and things like that, I only bring that up is because now if we're getting to building projects, we have some building projects. And then what is this discussion leaning into? Because the language is CLCs. And if that's something, Ms. Folk, I know that she's that is this the type of deep discussion that we're anticipating to get in, or is this a later discussion? Because I don't want to belabor anything, and I want everyone to come with their clear insights or understandings. Mayor?
Sure. I know that we've had a couple discussions with the city administration and APS administration about CLC issues over the last 15 months of this administration. I think perhaps it might be helpful. Mr. Fricker, our finance director, has some of kind of the numbers around kind of where we're at. I know that kind of painting on a broad picture, as we all know, the 0.25% income tax that paid for the borrowing for the CLC projects expires in 2033. And so I think that kind of was aligned to that contract. I know that from the city's perspective, we still have significant debt service through 2033 related to these projects. I think just under $200 million. And what I think is also notable is that the bonds, that the debt that we borrowed is not just pledged against our 0.25% CLC income tax, it's pledged against our entire city 2.5% income tax. So if there were a situation in which we were unable to pay the debt service in a given year, say, we look at the economic outlook over the next few years, we would be required to use our city income tax that we use for other city services to pay that debt service. I think in the context of that, it's not clear to me that we have any additional bonding capacity in the current income tax through 2033, but there are, I understand there's reserves that we have in that account, and then there's unexpended bond proceeds from prior projects. So I think, Mr. Fricker, if you can kind of go a little bit more into detail on that.
Right. So as the mayor said, we have debt that is outstanding until 2033. So that's the why the agreement goes out. So the original bonds and the income tax that was put in place to pay the bonds originally was a 30-year, when we did the first year was a 30-year bond issuance, and then the tax was set to correspond with that 30 years. So that's why the income tax expires in 2033 and all of the bonds will be paid off in 2033. So currently the city's paying approximately $20.3 million a year in debt service on the bonds. Part of that is the $3 million contribution that the schools make every year to the debt service fund. So that's the $3 million that goes in the beginning. So the city pays essentially the remaining $17 million with its CLC income tax that it collects. As the mayor said, there's a reserve fund that is also put in place that accumulates any funds that we collect in CLC tax above what is required to be paid in debt service. So that is there, and that is set up for the bondholders to protect the bondholders in case there's ever a drop in the income tax. So over the years, originally we built up a reserve fund balance up to approximately $20 million. And then there was years once all of the debt was put on where we were actually drawing on that reserve. So the reserve was going down at that point. And then the reserve also went down in 2020 and 2021 when we did have a dip in our income tax. And it has since been growing a little bit, but that's primarily put in place to protect the city, if there is a recession or something like that, such that we don't have to dip into our operating portion of the income taxes in order to pay the debt service on the CLC bonds. So as the mayor said, we have pledged our entire 2.5% of our income tax. So if there ever was a recession that the CLC tax wasn't sufficient to pay that, first we would dip into the reserves, and then if that was exhausted, we would have to dip into the portion of the tax that we're using for our operating funds and our capital funds in order to pay the debt service on those bonds.
Mr. Fricker, can you?
Mayor, thank you so much for that. You may be about to ask him something, and I'm going to follow up. So, Mayor.
Sure. I was just going to ask if you can also talk about the bond proceeds as well.
Yeah, so the bond proceeds, there's about $18 million in bond proceeds. That is the remnants of what was last issued in 2016. So that was the final bond issuance. We issued $27 million of bonds in 2016. All of those proceeds were transferred to the schools, I believe, within a year of the issuance. I don't know the specific dates. I do have that back at the office, but and that was the typical practice that we did with all of the bond issuances. The city would issue the bonds, and then the Akron Public Schools would request draws of those bond proceeds, which we would transfer over, and then those proceeds were put into the school construction funds in order to fund the CLC projects. So to date, there is, as I said, about $18 million worth of proceeds. So some of that is the original proceeds, and some of that is the interest that has been earned on those proceeds over the past approximately 8 years. So I think that we have, the city has concerns based on the fact that those proceeds have been there, as I said, for 8 years, that there are arbitrage issues with those proceeds. So that is a big concern of the cities.
Thank you, sir. It's a big concern of the district as well, because the question now becomes, if I'm following, thank you for that, for that great layout, because I was able to follow you very smoothly, and I think this is one of the first time I'm very clear.
I appreciate that. Usually I confuse everyone when I talk about things like that.
It was very succinct, and what I needed to follow along. So my question is, Mayor Malik, just to be clear, currently it's $200 million of debt related to CLC projects that the city will have to get. Right now, is that
Mr.
$200 million is what the mayor said?
I do not have the specific amount of that. I could get that here.
Okay.
I'll have Mike actually look for that. But so keep in mind, there's outstanding principal, which I believe is, the last time I looked at it, is approximately $160 million, but then there's interest as well. So, if you look at, we're basically have, 9 more years of $20 million debt service. So that's $180 million.
Okay, and so I was asking that because the money, as I understood, you said when the city receives the money from the taxes, that percentage, the school would do a draw on that money. You would send the money back to the school district, and this is how we have this reserve, this $18 million that's in the reserve. It was supposed to be money that...
No.
Yes,
so each year we get a certain amount of income tax that comes into the city. So my understanding is that $20.3 million that Mr. Fricker mentioned, that APS then contributes. APS then contributes $3 million to the annual debt service, and the city pays the remaining 17.3 out of that income tax that's received. If the income tax that we receive, the 0.25% income tax in a given year, is more than 17.3, then it is in our CLC reserve fund. Over the years, that CLC reserve fund has grown to, I believe it's roughly
$18.5 million.
I think, but I just want us to be careful, because I really want to note that $18 million is a significant amount of money, but in the context of all of that debt, the outstanding, $180 million pledged against our 2.5% income tax over the next 9 years, that we have to be very careful that we don't end up having to dip into not just the reserve, but also the rest of our income tax. And so we view that reserve as kind of sacrosanct. We need to be careful to have that reserve in place. I think the other place that Mr. Fricker mentioned is the bond proceeds. I think this has been the subject of discussion over the last few years due to facilities discussions here within APS. And I know that at one point, there was a commitment from Mayor Horrigan in the previous administration that roughly half of that funding could go towards the Piper Miller South project. I think I have maintained in this administration that commitment. I don't know if that's still the direction that we would want to go. I think there's a lot of questions around like how that would operate under the agreement. Would that require us to amend the agreement? But I think the other question is, what does that mean for CLC? So if that money were used for Piper, would it be a CLC? How does that fit into the decommissioning of Miller South? That's something that President Somerville has raised, making sure that we have a long-term plan for the decommissioning of schools. What would the rest of those bond proceeds be used for? I think all of that, should be a subject of our discussion over the coming months. I think the other point, Mr. Fricker touched on it briefly, is that as we've discussed previously with the administration, I think we do have a concern based on the significant amount of interest that has accrued on those bond proceeds since 2016, that some of that may be payable to the federal government, to the IRS, given the interest that's accrued there. And so I think we would, rather than saying there's $16 million and how do we spend that, I think we have to probably start by setting aside a portion of that, thinking that we will have to pay that to the IRS. And then from there, whether it's 14 million or 12 million or whatever it is, thinking about how that could potentially be used for projects. I think at the end of the day, it either has to be used for projects or it has to pay down the debt service. So,
Thank you, Mayor. That was my question. The questioning that I was going to lean into is, if this money is going into a reserve, because that's how I understood you to explain, is that this money, it was 18 million.
So there's
it's the bond issue, right?
Yeah.
It's the bond issue, which is.
Yeah. One of the things that is a little confusing is there are actually two separate funds of $18 million. One is the bond proceeds that the school has custody of right now. And the second is our reserve fund that the city has custody of. So that reserve fund, as the mayor said, is there to protect us in the case that there's a recession and the income tax collections drop. It's also pledged to the bondholders. So it's really not even a matter of being able to even look at using that for. That is in the bond indenture there to protect the bondholders in case there's an economic downturn. So it's basically pledged to them. So now the other thing I want to add is, we've been talking about the arbitrage concerns that we have. One of the things I think, as the mayor said, I think a good first step would be to try to determine what that amount might be. And in order to do that, we are going to need the assistance of the schools to basically look back at, since the proceeds were distributed to the schools, some of them were used to build school projects, some of them earn interest. In order to do those calculations, we're going to need essentially the school's construction fund records in order to determine what the arbitrage amount is. So that's something I think that we want to kind of lay out.
Okay. Member Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we have a few things going on here, and for the sake of the school system, I think we need to be clear that as we talk about the 0.25% tax and we talk about the bond, that we're talking about taxpayers' money, okay? And how this originally started was the schools and the city got together because we understood that we needed buildings, we needed new school buildings, and we understood to have a healthy, vibrant city, that it was to both our interests to build schools for our children. So as the agreement was put in place, the city and the school district came together to put this agreement in place that was mutually beneficial. Okay, and each side knew not only the benefits, but we also knew the risk. And each side agreed to those principles. Okay, and so to speak of one entity being careful to leverage in the event that a recession happens, in the event that we can no longer, or the one entity can no longer pay their responsible share or what was agreed to, I have to speak as a board member and say the school board is in a recession. And as we come to this table, monies that was promised we don't have, okay, for the schools. So I just want to be clear that as we are talking about this, that we all entered into this thing with known risk, and now no one side should expect the other side to take, to not be protected. I would ask that Mr. Fricker would submit the oral report that he just gave us to the school district, and as we, I'm not saying this in a negative way, but the school district has, the city has the benefit of having a finance director and a team that is salaried. They have the benefit of a law department that is salaried. Anything that we do as a district now in this agreement, the school district has the liability of paying for whatever we do. And whatever decision we make now concerning the arbitrage, concerning the building, we built our last building in 2021. It was completed in 2022. The Joint Board of Review not only does not have functional committees, but I was reading, and I think Ms. Folk brought this up in a meeting in 2019, that the committees needed to be, the Citizens Committee needed to be reenacted. So again, as I talked with President Somerville, it is good, this information is good, but I think we need to have this information in writing, and we need the benefit of educating ourselves before we come, because I think we're getting away from whatever we do with this money, we possibly have to go back to taxpayers to ask them permission to do anything with this money. And it's a question. It's a question in my mind as a taxpayer. If I pass a tax increase and that money is going to be used for anything other than what it was passed for, I would think that the taxpayers should have the benefit of weighing in on it, and especially since we don't have a functioning Citizens Committee. President Somerville and I again talked Wednesday because she's unclear and I'm unclear. Well, I can't speak for her, but we seem to be unclear on a whole bunch of things because we were not at the table in the original agreement. And a lot has changed. So, Madam President, I would ask that we would get these things in writing and that we would have the opportunity to review their position. I have been following the Joint Board of Review, well, not the Joint, I've been following the building of the schools for the last 15 years. There are some things that should have happened that didn't happen. There are some communities that feel like they didn't have the benefit of other communities. And that's all of our issue. And so, again, I would ask that the city would submit what they just gave us in writing and that we can then maybe even as individuals talk among ourselves. Because as I listen now, again, it seems like, as they should because they are responsible, it seems like the city has all of the information and the historical background, but we're not privy to that. We've had four superintendents. We've had 2 treasurers. We had numerous board members. So I would ask that we would start there and have the benefit of that information, the financial information, and the city's position on that information. Thank you.
President Somerville.
Thank you, Madam President. And to Mayor Malik's point and also Pastor Harrison's point, I think that is why it's clear that we understand we're not going to be able to solve it all today, right? And that clearly there's going to need to be a series of meetings and conversations so that we can all be educated. Because I think the other thing that we have to have a clear understanding is how can these funds even be used? What can we use them for? And Mayor Malik kind of mentioned this, but I want to go back to it. For me, my concern is before we think about entering into another agreement with Akron Public Schools in terms of building anything, any more CLCs, we've got to make sure that Akron residents have access to buildings. That is a big problem for me. And so I just want to make that very clear. Before we talk about partnering on building anything together, we've got to make sure that CLCs are accessible to Akron residents and they have the ability to use those centers. My other concern is when Akron Public Schools decommission schools. There must be a plan. You know, the idea that, Akron Public Schools just kind of walks away from the building and it is the community that is left to deal with the blight. And ultimately, the city of Akron is held 100% responsible on the demolition, and again, there has to be some responsibility from APS to help address, these buildings when, in fact, they are decommissioned. So again, those are just some concerns I'm hoping in a series of these meetings and conversations that we can really, talk about.
Yes, Mayor Malik. Excuse me. Thank you.
I think particularly to Pastor Harrison's point, I think certainly we should share this information in writing. I think also, as Mr. Fricker mentioned, there is some information that the city does not have as well. And so I think it's kind of making sure that each entity has all the information we can. I think that to the other point, the CLC agreement is very complex. It's, I think, one of the most complex agreements I've ever seen. And so I think it would, behoove us that we, make sure to take some time and all have an opportunity to review that, but also, frankly, that our city law department, that APS council have an opportunity to really dig into that, because I think it's highly technical. I think, there are probably some places that can be interpreted in different ways. And I think whatever we do going forward, we want to make sure that we are hewing to that agreement, as much as possible. We're required to. So I think there's a lot here, to your point, sir.
Thank you. And as it's already been stated, this is such a multifaceted situation that, as to Mayor Malik's earlier point, we have to meet more regularly to unpack everything that we're talking about. President Somerville, about blighted buildings. This has been an issue that's come up even in board meetings. And again, when we're talking about building projects. Now, I just want to go back a little bit because as I was understanding when we were talking about these funds and the usage of the funds, because Member Harrison made a point about going back to voters, and what I'm trying to get clarity, and I just want to say it on the mic so as we're researching these things, that if the decision has already been made for the schools, the extra money that or the leftovers after the building project, and there are things that need to be done to these same schools or repairs or things like that, then because it was designated funds for these schools, that possibly these funds could be used for some of the management. It's a question, I'm not saying this as a declarative statement. If these funds that were already designated for these specific CLCs, and if I'm understanding, it's money that was left in the reserve from the building, because the money was supposed to go for the construction in the building of this project, that if the money is there as designated funds for these projects, then certain repairs or things that may need to happen for the management of these buildings, that money, without going back on the ballot, without seeking additional approval, should be able, it seems to be applied towards those things. Is that?
So I will say the use of the funds has to be used for either the capital construction of facilities or to pay back debt service. So it cannot be used for operating costs or anything like that. It has,
I'm
to,
talking about
it has to be
construction.
capital.
Like if it's excuse me, sorry, I didn't mean to cut your wisdom.
That's
you
all
can
right.
finish. I apologize. That's what I'm talking about, capital improvements, building repairs that it almost seems that it shouldn't be. If a building was built 20 years ago, if it was built for tough, it shouldn't need repairs. But as I'm understanding, some of these CLCs are in need of some capital improvements. And so what I'm positing here is if that money that was designated then could be used for those capital improvements. Not saying you have to answer it now. This is just a process. The other part that I'm trying to get clarity on is when we talk about the two pots of money. The one pot of money, and anyone chime in on this, it seems that it's not our discussion to have. It is for the city and the citizens of Akron as a safeguard in the event to say, hey, we're not going to overly try to just stretch you out more than we need to, that this reserve is here because we have committed in good faith this project with Akron Public Schools. Mayor, can you give me some, is that correct, that other pot of money is that?
Yes, I mean, it's essentially the reserve as has been stated, and so we're not in a position to expend that on anything else, right? I think my understanding, I think I'm right, is that the income tax money that came in was never directly applied to projects. That's correct, Mr. Fricker?
Correct.
It was used to pay for bonds, right? So, income tax money would come in, we would commission bonds, and then we would pay the debt service on the bond. So, this, I think, and definitely, appreciate, Pastor Harrison, your point about expectations and risk. I think it's just, to me, knowing that that 0.25% was pledged against the whole 2.5%, that was something that, very much surprised me when I first learned about it a few years ago. And we are all, as we look at the stock market today, as we look at all of the challenges that all of our organizations are facing, just want to be cognizant of that. We all need to deliver, service to our residents, to our students into the future. So I think, that piece is really just a question of is that debt service is there to pay off, that reserve is there to pay off the debt service. The bond proceeds, I think that is pretty much where, and I think the other point is, to Mr. Fricker's point, is that there really is not additional bonding capacity, right? So it does not appear that we are in a position to borrow any additional money based on that income tax, right? And so really that just leaves us, as far as the Joint Board of Review goes, with how do we dispose of these bond proceeds that are currently there that were not expended in 2016? I think that was my understanding of Mr. Fricker, as part of the Garfield and Ellett projects. Those were funds that basically were left over from that we borrowed beyond what was ultimately spent.
Thank you, Mayor Malik. Dr. Thompson?
So the two funds, one fund isn't even in play right now. It's not, it shouldn't even be on the table. That maybe the discussion needs to be looking forward, thinking if there are proceeds remaining at the end of 3033, what happens then? But that's a question for 3033. What the board's probably more used to hearing is our 004 account. That's $18,190,000 sits in that account right now. And the reason we're having an arbitrage problem, for those of you that aren't familiar with arbitrage, the federal government only lets you borrow so much money and then invest and make so much money off of that before they start to basically penalize you. And that's what we have to figure out, because that money just keeps sitting there and keeps sitting there and keeps sitting there because it's in dispute about who can use it and how it can be used is the question. So the longer we delay on making a decision about that $18.1 million, the greater our risk is of losing additional dollars to arbitrage. So, we've had some discussions previously about how to spend that $18 million down. I don't think anybody's at 16% accruing each year in construction costs over the last couple of years, year over year. Our projects that we do have remaining, which are not technically CLCs, we're going to have, I'm concerned about being able to hit the threshold of being able to pay for the construction of those projects. But nonetheless, that if we can just start to work on, from my selfish perspective, and I do have all those, they're right here on my phone, pulled them up before we came down here, so I'll make sure I print them off and you get those, Steve. We know exactly how much is there. And although the buildings are complete, they were built in 6 segments. Segment 6 is still not closed through the OFCC. So that's not closed. So even though the building's been under use for the last couple of years, we're very close to that, but not officially closed. So Valerie Mills is working on that issue. She's our controller. She's on it. She's doing a great job with that and working with the state to get that closed out, because we won't know final dollar amounts, final arbitrage, any of that until segment 6 closes. So I know that we have at least considered and budgeting for buildings to be, there is built into the budget of our current builds to take the Pfeiffer and Miller South down. So those funds are in place for that project. We planned for that,
Okay.
budgeted for that. Now assuming we can still afford it, but that was in the plans.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so you guys have budgeted to take down Miller South?
That's correct.
Okay, that's good news. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Mr. Harrison, Member Harrison, excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I guess that's what I was trying to get to, is that we should only be concerned with the one pot of money. Correct. The way the city manages their, however they did, is the way they manage. And I appreciate Mayor Malik and Chair Jackson. I appreciate this meeting. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation because it has been on the table a long time. But I would be remiss without saying that the original reason we entered into this agreement is the city of Akron needed healthy schools, and the children of Akron needed safe, dry buildings. And we still have 2 buildings that have to be completed to do that, to accomplish that. Most importantly, the citizens of Akron said that North High School, the North community needed, we owed it to them to build a building, and they approved that by 59%. So if we're talking money, I would say that we all entered into an agreement as adults, as leaders, let me say that, as leaders, as elected leaders, to provide safe, dry, warm schools for our students. And I would just like to make sure that we understand Miller South and Pfeiffer needs to be built. And as we continue this series of conversation, we had a finance meeting. Cost of construction, before this week, was going up at 16%. So even as we have these discussions, whether it's 18 million or 16 million, those millions decreased by 25% Tuesday. So I would ask that we would focus on that issue immediately to find a resolution, because the kids still need a warm, safe, dry place to learn. And the citizens, we still have an open promise to them that we would provide that as a city and as a school district.
Thank you. But just as a point of order, that we remain germane on this topic, because the Pfeiffer build in Miller South is not a part of this agreement that we're discussing on today. And so the goal for this meeting is to focus on this cooperative agreement that was established May of whatever year, I can't recall it now, and to move forward with the understanding of that agreement, because as I understand it, this group and the city, unless I'm missing something, is not in any bonded cooperative agreement regarding our new construction projects that we agreed upon for for this agreement. I'm saying, as far as this cooperative agreement, that's not in this, and that's what we're talking about. Am I unclear about that?
I think that just having mentioned the previous administration and some of the prior discussion about potentially using those bond proceeds for the Pfeiffer Miller South project, it sounds like that is not currently within the plan.
Just 1 second. Not that it's not in the plan. I just, after looking over this plan, I'm just seeking clarity of how it became a part of the plan as not a CLC. That's all I'm asking, because I understand the conversation, which is what you led with, Mayor Malik, that you're going to continue the commitment of the previous, that you still believe in the Miller South and the Pfeiffer project. But I'm just saying, for this meeting, I don't know the answer. That's why I'm asking, and what Reverend Harrison was speaking and the treasurer could speak to. I was unclear when I looked through this of how that would happen versus the question that I posited, that the current CLCs that may need funds, could that money be used for that, or do we make those any new construction a CLC? So,
and I think that was all I was going to say, is that I think that's the question. Is I think that all of the discussions around potentially ever using those bond proceeds for Pfeiffer or for any project, we're all kind of at a very hypothetical, abstract level. We're never reduced to, an agreement. We're never approved by this. They never got to the point where they would be recommended by the joint board, would be accepted by the school board. And so they were very hypothetical. And so I think there's a lot of questions around how that would work. To your point, if any bond proceed money was used for that project or for North, would that make them CLCs? I don't know. Is it in our community's interest for those projects to be CLCs? Potentially, right? But I think that's a really big question. And so I think however these funds are, whatever priorities we all collectively have for these funds, I think we have a lot of questions over how that would work in practice, because I think all of the discussion has been kind of very abstract and without respect to like how it would work in the agreement. I don't know, if you spend $1 from this fund on a building, does that make it a CLC? I don't know, right? And so that's why I think we need to go to the agreement and really dig into that.
Thank you for that, Mayor. And that's my question, because the agreement is about CLCs. And so I don't know, but I'm not a lawyer, and it seems like legal could weigh in heavier, because if the money is used towards, this is just from a layman's term, this is just from me, a non-lawyer, if the money can be used, if money can be put towards Pfeiffer and Miller South, then they become, in some instance, a CLC if the construction could be made with that. And I think you posited earlier, do we need to modify or amend the current agreement with some language? So I think the most important thing is getting to that, because everyone keeps asking since I came on this board, what about this money? What about this money? What to do with this money? And then it's a lot of, like you said, theoretical things that are posited, and it's like, what is the action step? This is theoretical, like what is actual action item that can be aligned with this, and can this happen? The debt, the money, as you said, Mr. Fricker? Yes. It can be used for either capital improvements or to pay the debt service. And so that's, my head is just keep going there, because if it's used for capital improvement, it's still a debt, but then that interest situation is not sitting there, it's being actively used. So we don't run the risk of the penalty. So this are the type of things that I'm processing that I feel we need to answer. I say, how do you eat the elephant one bit at a time? So first, it almost seems like people need to go back maybe through the agreement and pull out those areas, because I actually read through it and highlighted. That's why when I'm sitting here, I'm very perplexed about the conversation, because I feel like the agreement is clear in some areas, but the conversation doesn't seem like it's clear. And so I'm sorry, that's my statement, and I want to recognize Member, who was that? Member Harrison? Yes.
Madam Chair, I want to speak to your point of order first. No school is mentioned in the agreement. Okay, so no, just CLCs. And so when I speak of Miller South Pfeiffer, that has been on the table for a long time, but the original agreement did not mention any schools. It mentioned CLCs. In the original agreement, we there were a fixed number of schools that were going to be built, so the agreement has changed as needed. I'm going to say that, as needed by the different administrators. In the minutes that were just approved, Christine Fowler-Mack spoke of looking at this agreement and amending the agreement as needed to that particular time. I think that was in 22. So when I speak about the agreement, and when I speak about building schools, I speak of the purpose that we came together, and that was to build schools. And so if there's any money that is to be discussed, and we are still building schools, it would be a logical assumption on my part that we're talking about money to build schools. And if any other thing that we do with money that is not building schools, I think the taxpayers should have the benefit of weighing in on it. But I speak of Miller South and Pfeiffer because we have passed a bond to build North. The money was collected to build schools. That's why I speak of that, because we still need to do that.
Understood. Thank you, Member Harrison. And the only clarification, not in disagreement with anything that you said, was the clarification was when I'm thinking CLC. So I'm just thinking, not abstractly. Like, I'm just thinking from the black and white. And so, to your point, then my mind goes, okay, so they would have to be a CLC. And then what would that take for them to be a CLC? Or if said money, like you said, warm, safe, dry, will go into capital improvements of buildings that this money was already earmarked for. So that's kind of, I think we are saying, it's just giving me greater insight where I'm trying to say, okay, if it's focused, if it's designated funds, as I've always understood, designated funds have to be used for what they're designated for. And so when I saw the CLC language, it takes, and you, like when you were just talking about Miller South and Piper, I'm like, okay, so are these going to be CLCs? Is North going to be a CLC? Because although it doesn't say specific school, it is specific on what's being constructed, and that's a CLC. So just for clarity, that's why I said that, but I'm in agreement with everything that you said. Mayor Mallett.
Sure. I just had a question for Dr. Thompson, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. In the funding structure that's planned for Piper and North, you know, in APS's plans, has that included funding from these bond proceeds?
Yes. One of our original conversations with Mayor Horrigan at the time was that it would be a split of those funds, and then there was more discussions and concerns that were echoed by President Somerville of the buildings that we have sold, but we sold them, and then owners essentially didn't fulfill their diligence of being owners of buildings. Very difficult for the city to trace down, and it ends up being in the lap of the city. The school district sold them, you know. So then it segued shortly after that into discussions about, well, what if we use the rest of the money and tore all these buildings down? Was some of the early discussions, and then they stopped. So, but since its onset, we have budgeted $8 million because we believe it was $16 million in the fund at that time, in the 004 count at that time, towards the Miller South Piper build. So if none of those funds were to be able to be used for that project, we predicated our COPS deal, our certificates of participation, which is how we funded the majority of that build, coupled with some reserve set from ESSER dollars, we would be short $8 million.
So I think with that in mind, I think a big question for us is, one, whether that is the wish of the Joint Board of Review, right? I think, secondly, what that would mean in practice, right? So would using $8 million of bond proceed money for the Piper Miller South project, if that is what the Joint Board wants to do, which I'm not assuming, but if that is what the Joint Board wants to do, whether that would make that project a CLC, what would need to be done under the agreement, would it need to be amended, you know, all of those things. I think that's a big. I think to me the arbitrage question is question one, and this is probably question two.
Madam Chair, I certainly.
Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly appreciate Mayor Shamus's question, because that's a very relevant question, and I think that in that particular question, we as a board would lean into the superintendent's reports and his recommendation, and I think that we would have to certainly defer to him and the board, and that's not something that we could. That's something that we would have to really have the superintendent give us recommendations on.
Vice President Alexander.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Member Molinar? Yes, Member Molinar, thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate all of these comments, and especially the last question from the mayor. Is this the wish of the Joint Board of Review? Because as I sit here, as I'm gathering all this information, pot of money A, pot of money B, and group of people C, right? How many of the meetings are city meetings? How many of the meetings are school district meetings, administrative meetings, as Member Harrison said, and how many of them are joint board? If we're having a series of meetings, what types of things do we need to look at? Because eventually, I'm guessing, since I'm sitting around this table, I'm going to need to make a decision, right? And so the type of information as a school board representative that I think about, and I look at this contract, right, and as we discuss confusion within this contract, is not just what is mutually beneficial, as Member Harrison has brought up several times, what's mutually beneficial, but also what's possible, what's feasible, what could be done. Does it need edited? What edits need to occur? What would happen if we add a building or don't add a building? It's really difficult as a representative to think about what I'm going to advocate for and what I'm going to try to work towards a compromise as a joint board if I don't know, and if I talk to constituents and things like that, if I don't know the pros and cons of the various scenarios. And so I think from a starting point, what I would really like, and once again, as Member Harrison pointed out, our district does not have the financial or legal resources that the city has in comparison. And so if the city could help us in drafting some hypotheticals, if we added Miller South Pfeiffer this amount, what that would be, what that would do to the contract, how that fits into the current contract. If we add North, what that looks like within the contract, what that feasibility is. And then once we have, I think, a grasp as a group of the feasibility, then we can break off and then decide what are we advocating for. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Molinar. Yes, Vice President Alexander.
All right. This has been very, very good discussion. There's some things I've learned that I didn't know or I thought I may have known. I haven't been part of JBR in years. But it sounds like the two entities, being the city and APS, leadership needs to get together, get a good understanding so we understand what is going on, understand the dollars, the pots of dollars, and so forth, and then begin to start saying, okay, we're ready to come back so it can be explained clearly so everybody, including the public, will understand what is going on and how we can spend the money if we can and so forth, and then be able to move forward. We also need to talk about that contract. I mean, a lot about the contract. We do need to review the contract and see if there's anything we need to amend and so forth. So my recommendation would be that the leadership of both entities get together to try to hash out some of this so we can get a good understanding, come back to our entities and hopefully let them know what's going on, and then come back as a JBR if we need to have that, and then start moving forward as to how we want to manage and use the funds that we may have access of. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Vice President Alexander. Member Autry.
Thank you, Madam President. And so as one of the members who sat on this JBR since 2020, I'm just hearing a lot of different things, but the one issue that seems to not be as prominent that I think needs to be for our taxpayers is the access, and I know President Somerville touched upon it. So that's what I continue to hear about, and I know there was a lot of work done. I know one of our committees received the new CLC usage handbook. I think this is the committee that needs to really see that, and I'm also interested in just hearing from folks who might still be falling through the cracks, because I know we've recently heard at our board meetings issues with the access still. I think the community was expecting to have access, and I'm sad that we're still here talking about that is not fully fleshed out and clear to everyone. I know we're talking about this money and how it could be used. It just makes sense to me that we somehow find a way to use it to offset the costs for these smaller community groups who are having challenges with accessing the buildings. So as I look back on all the JBR minutes, I think I mentioned this at every single JBR committee meeting. And so I think it's important that we just keep it on the table, and our taxpayers deserve to know how they can access these buildings. And this committee needs to see the presentation as well on the work that I know has been done on that handbook. Thank you.
Thank you. One second, Mayor. Thank you, Member Autry. And because there is a committee, I was trying to find, that's what I was going through my pages regarding the CLC, the usage. It's a committee that's erected as part of the agreement. As I start about page 46, and it talks about it's the CLC Advisory Committee. And part of it says that the committee shall be composed of 9 members as follows: 4 members designated by the Board of Education to serve staggered 2-year terms and reappointed, like a whole committee for that, which that committee is who should be handling that discussion. And if done with fidelity, it's that committee that should have the community members and the things that we are faced with where the community is crying out at council meetings as well as board meetings. Those people are at the table, and so all those blind spots and those gray areas and the issues and the pushback and the narratives that we're getting told, and then the community is saying that is not true because I've tried to get in there. If they are the agitators, in a good way agitate, I'm saying that, and they're leading the change, then it puts us in a better position because they are the forerunners of that. But here, this committee would get recommendations then from that committee on what we need to do possibly to assist them. But it's a committee that's supposed to be erected strictly for the management of that, as I understand. And it's in agreement, but I think that's what's been neglected, like the other committee, like the Citizens Committee that's been dispersed. This is what we may need to look at. I'm sorry. Thank you. Mayor, you may proceed.
No, Madam President, I 100% agree with you. And I think, from my perspective, I think the points, Ms. Autry, that you raise are absolutely the right points for our 2 organizations to be focused on. I know we all hear very regularly about, the gap that is still there between the expectations and the ideal for how these facilities would be used and the reality, which I think we are proud of to the extent that they are used, but I think we all know that we can raise the bar higher. And so, I guess from my perspective, I would like to see if maybe before the next Joint Board of Review meeting, we can do some work, particularly with the administration, to see how we could potentially stand up that Citizens Committee. I also, do want to note, obviously, that we have a number of folks from our teams who have been doing diligent work on this. Rochelle Wardell, our education and health strategist, Ms. Falk, and many other people. And so, I will just say, I'm a little bit, I have strong opinions about this too. The first remark I made to Mr. Fricker was, we got the $16 million in bond proceeds. Can we just spend some of that on insurance, and we can just have a blanket insurance policy, right? He was very, 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 very clear that the money has to be used on capital, as he stated today. But if that is, I think that's been one issue that has recurred over the years that we have to tackle as organizations. Maybe it's not proper for the Joint Board of Review, but it's absolutely proper for the City of Akron and the school board and the Akron Public Schools to be talking about that. So I don't know, Rochelle, would you like to speak at all to the issues that you all have been working on with regard to access?
And while she's coming to the podium, I also want to address this. Also in the agreement concerning the CLCs, it makes reference to the liability of the insurance being on both entities in some type of way. Like there's a portion that the district is responsible for, and I need to go through it because I read this earlier in the week. But there is discussion in there about insurance coverage that I don't want to quote that it's 50-50 or something, but if we look at that in some type of way of how we can best leverage that to whereas maybe the citizens, if someone is getting, it's a certain rider, or we can get some type of corporate sponsor that covers the community rider for what their portion they might have to pay, just to throw out there as an option. Thank you. You may go ahead.
Is this the button? I think that was the button. I'm used to the button on the microphone, but there's one over here. Okay.
You can press that again if you want to.
What do I want to do? Sorry? Oh, no, I don't. This is an off-the-cuff thing. Thank you so much, Mayor, for giving me the opportunity to talk about what has been going on. I know we've talked to many of you in different settings about some of the progress that we've made. Although the CLC Advisory Committee is not formally in place, there have been roughly 9 people working on this issue for over a year. Deborah Folk from the schools and a couple of people from her team in the Youth Success Summit. Folks have been working on it. They've been convening us together, and our team, people at Recreation at the city, have all been working together. These are the people that are like really operating the CLC rentals and everything, and they know all the ins and outs. And what we have done to this point is to identify a number of issues that are in the way for access. And some of them are procedural, and we can call them, I think of them as like the low-hanging fruit, which is what we've been tackling. Let's make sure that our procedures are the same. Let's make sure that our fees look the same so that there is clarity. Let's put together an online system so that paper isn't moving very slowly through the city between entities. Like, let's put it all in one place, which makes it more equitable. So these are the things that we have been able to accomplish to this point. Also, but there are cultural issues. There are customer service issues. There's the insurance issue, and that this group is committed to continuing to tackle things one at a time. And next up on our list is the insurance issue. There has been work done with that. We've consulted with different insurance vendors about different ways that we can do it. We intend to put together some recommendations on what the community can do to solve that insurance issue. So I do want you to rest assured that that work is being done, and this agreement does have that formal committee, and it's mostly in place if you all are ready to push the button on it, and we can make it a more formal thing and then present it to the different boards. So I believe that this board is about the construction and the funds for that construction. But the Board of Education and the committees of the Board of Education are the ones that approve the usage of the CLCs, along with support from our City Council and administration.
Thank you. Member Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to belabor the point because I've been making this point for almost 15, 20 years. It is great when the city and members of the school district come together to solve and to really correct some of the issues and do away with the low-hanging fruit. But we have still missed opportunities to involve the public. And as we had that presentation, I shared with Dr. Ellen McWilliam Woods that there are organizations that don't have resources that are not formally organized as nonprofits but they're neighborhood organizations. Grandmother who has 5 people who want to knit together on Wednesday nights. They don't have access to these buildings. And this has been a problem. And so when we have these committees and we put these things together and we sit down and we're going to appoint people on these committees. And as I looked at the committees, they were all retired city employees, retired school board members, but Grandma wasn't on there. My nephew wasn't on there. So the people who are actually in the community, who actually touch people every day, they need to be on these committees, because those are where we fill in the gaps. And I have, railed against Deborah Folk when I wasn't on the school board about access. But to Deborah Folk's credit, Deborah Folk has been saying that in these board of review meetings as well. There is no citizen representation there. And we need to get rid of titles and put 4 people on this board who either coach football, who coach cheerleaders, who have a sewing group. We need to put those people on this board, because the first thing that we have with these learning centers is community. And so that's not something against the city or the board, but that's what we have been missing, is true representation from the community, and that's what we built these schools for.
Thank you for that, Member Harrison. And to the point, thank you for sharing that you made, if we want to formalize, because the agreement already formalized that a committee should exist. And based off of the agreement, it is written out very well, and it says that the city appoints 4, the board appoints 4, and that is an at-large member, right? And so when you think about the appointments, I think it's very important, if you're going to create such a committee, which needs to be done with fidelity so that we meet the needs of our community, right, is that you need people who have the knowledge and the wherewithal from the city part and the school part. But to your other point, I think without question that at-large member should be a community member, and possibly, if we look at the agreement, maybe it's 3, 3, and 3, like 3 board, 3 city, community, and then the at-large is community, like in some capacity. So it's like a third. That's something to consider. But as it's written, it is 4 representatives, the city appoints, 4 representatives, the board appoints, they collectively come together, and there's an at-large person, whoever that at-large person would be. In my mind, theoretically, when I'm looking at it, this should be it's clearly somebody from the community who can speak. But when you're talking about one person for the whole city, it just seems like it would be, the fidelity would be in making it 3 city people, like, community people to some capacity. But the framework is there, and just how we might want to adjust that framework so that when we get together, we have the recommendations and what's being said, and we know what's happening, and then we can go on with the business of the finance, what we're supposed to be doing, construction, and how it's using, any updates that need to happen, the insurance discussion, things like that. Mayor Malik, yes?
Yeah, so I totally agree, and I think that we do need to have citizen participation in this. I think that, people who are experiencing the obstacles, need to be at the table when we're having these discussions. I think that, it's a good action step. I think that, hopefully prior to the next meeting, we can go ahead and formalize that advisory committee that's envisioned by the agreement, and make sure that there's citizen representation. I think that, in my mind, there's maybe 3 things that we can do, if I can suggest before the next meeting, that we can share information that's needed, so that we can hopefully at least come to understanding between our treasurer and our director of finance and to the extent that lawyers need to be involved, about the next steps around this arbitrage issue. I think the second would be really digging into the contract and figuring out what the usage, what are permitted and not permitted expenditures of funds, and if funds are used for a project, what does that mean for like the CLC status? To me, that's a second bucket. And then the third bucket, I think, is formalizing the Citizens Advisory Group around the CLC access.
All right, thank you, Mayor Malik. I'm in agreement with those suggestions. As far as formalizing, I think the discussions can happen before we gather together. So all we're doing is when we do meet, it's already together, basically. We already have those committees together because we know what the mandate is, the requirement from both sides based off the current agreement. And so I think that's a good start. I think we have some good points at this meeting, at this point in juncture at 11:20. And so if there's not any other pressing topics that we need to bring up, we went over the agenda topics. Mayor Malik?
Yeah, maybe would we want to just talk briefly? Would love to get folks' feedback about, setting that next meeting. So do we think maybe we could meet every other month?
Oh, yeah, that was part of the discussion before.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure before we left that.
Yeah, we're not, yes.
Yeah.
And so just to recap, we did deal with the updates on like building projects. We talked about that. We talked about LFI funds, and because there's no clarity on what those funds are supposed to be designated from, we just flowed naturally into the agenda. And so I'm just formally recapping that we did follow the agenda as was set for this meeting. And to Mayor Malik's point and the earlier point that was made about regular scheduling meetings, that we need to convene more regularly. And so I think as we get ready to, before we adjourn this meeting, we can state that we'll get together and see timing as far as that we need to meet at least however many times a quarter that we think will be suitable, like twice a quarter, like that's what.
I think Mayor had a good suggestion, every other month.
I'm sorry. Yep. I just went, Duh, Carla. Yeah, so every other month, but we have to check what day would that be on every other month, and what time is feasible for all parties if we do every other month. Or are we just going to do a polling? I think that's what we need to kind of discuss. We don't have to come up with that now. Every other month we know is a good time frame, but when every other month, I think will be a discussion. Superintendent.
Thank you, Madam President. Let the administration here convene time with the mayor's office to look at when and the frequency of these meetings, because this is going to be a huge undertaking, and I know it's an urgent situation, but I want to make sure that we don't sit here and commit to something that we end up not being able to do, whether that's the cadence is every other month or every twice a quarter. Let us sit down and look at that and come back.
I'm fine with that, as long as we are meeting regularly, because it can't be like years in between. Yes, Madam President.
Thank you, Madam President. And Mayor, I'm just thinking, if members of this body have questions, I don't know, and I don't want to put anything more on Rochelle there. Is it okay for, them to direct those questions to Rochelle, or how do you think?
Absolutely. I think that, Rochelle, as the education and health strategist, really is, I think, our policy lead when it comes to education for the city. I think that to the extent that there are finance-related questions, Mr. Fricker really is the expert and the lead there. And so I think, I'll leave it to both of them. And obviously, Mr. Lash, as the person overseeing our rec and parks, also has significant role when it comes to access and helping lead that piece. So, any of the three, I think, can be available for questions in the meantime before we meet again.
Member Alexander. Thank you, Mayor.
Question. Should we have all those individuals receive questions, or should it maybe go to one person? Because we may miss something, but we should have it go directly to one person, and they can send it back out. And if it pertains to those other areas or those finance or recreation and so forth, they can get the information back to her, and she can get it back out. Because I think when you have too much information going to too many people, something's going to get lost.
That's fine, and Rochelle can be the point person. We'll make sure after this to circulate her email and phone number so that she can be the point person for all of that.
And
Superintendent.
thank you, President Jackson, but I'm also going to ask that the access to whatever document is also accessible on the district side, because we need to have somebody on the district side who has the same access to whatever it is that your person is receiving, just so that we know what's going on and can respond as well.
Who should be the point person from the district side?
Right now, I will have our chief of staff because she's already been kind of working with this, so right now I'll have her to be the point person.
Okay.
On our side, Ms. Carter, Angela
Okay.
Carter.
So I would say that, for any questions, then if folks can include both Ms. Carter and Ms. Wardell.
And then you just make sure to share with the board that the board is aware. Thank you, Member Molnar.
Thank you, Madam President. I hear that administrations are going to meet to determine the meetings, so I just wanted to advocate for what the mayor said, which is meeting every other month. So as those discussions and as those considerations are happening, like this is the first Friday of the month, so I think that type of cadence would be really good as we talk about involving our community, as we talk about transparency. I think having that expectation, even if, and I heard the superintendent say, we might not be ready, and I think even if we aren't finished with something, an update on the progress and what's been done so far, and while one organization might not have everything, the other organization might, and the information that they could bring to us could help evolve what the other side is working on. So I would advocate for regular meetings of progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Molnar. Any other discussion? All right. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me for this, my first meeting, but a lot to learn. I agree with Ms. Molnar here. Every other month, first Friday, whatever it is, if I could ask closer to 11 o'clock. Thank you.
No problem. And that's the thing about timing. So in order to not make any, rash decisions as far as timing, I think we need to convene, look at our schedules and see what would be most feasible that we can convene together to discuss this, because I think this was a great meeting, and we have some great points to look into. And to everyone's point, we know we need to get back into this setting sooner than later, and so that is the expectation. That's without question, that we will convene sooner than later. So we've heard the suggestion of the every other month, and it seems like people are kind of resolved around that. But again, the superintendent is going to look to some things, and then we'll have some updates sooner than later. And if not, then that's, some decisions will be made. Member Harrison, it looked like you wanted to say something. You're always trying to say something. Respectfully. All right. If nothing else, we stand to adjourn. As we get ready to, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Vice President Alexander, seconded by Mayor Malik. Any discussion? Right. It needs to be second. Thank you, Superintendent.
Could we adjourn for the joint board of review, and then the board can adjourn separately? We can do that.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to adjourn. So we're adjourning from the joint board of reviews. Thank you for that.
Yep.
And so was was moved by Alexander, seconded by the mayor for the joint board of review. Is that what we're saying? Okay. Thank you. We stand adjourned. JBR. And then now we're going to adjourn for our regular board meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn for our special board meeting?
So moved.
It's been moved by Member Alexander. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Member Harrison. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, we stand adjourned at 11:29.